Strategic Management and Strategic Competitiveness, Part 2. The question that we are trying to address here is why some firms perform better than other firms. We're going to take two perspectives, an internal perspective and an external perspective. The external perspective, we're going to look it through the lens of IO model of above average returns. And the internal perspective, we're going to look through the lens of RBV, or resource-based view of above average returns. The first one, the external perspective, industrial organizational model. The industrial organization and the industrial economic theory are a macro and a microeconomic approach to explain the interaction between organization and its markets. Basically, what we are trying to state here is that organizations interact with the macroeconomic environment and the microeconomic environment in which the firm operates, and we have to understand these interactions to actually understand the firm performance. The foundation of economic theory was the book of Adam Smith in 1766 named Wealth of Nations. Economist Alfred Marshall presented the first idea about industrial organizational theory at the end of 18th century. This theory hypothesizes that market and industry structures determine member firms' conduct and performance. By structure, we are talking about how the macroeconomic environment is organized, as well as the industry is organized in which the firm operates. By conduct, we are referring to the strategic actions initiated by the firm or the strategies chosen by the firm. Performance, we're going to talk about performance in terms of whether the firm is able to achieve average returns, below average returns, or above average returns. J.S. Bain was the person who actually made this concept of structure, conduct, and performance famous, which is still used in most of the strategic management or industrial organizational research. The IO model is grounded in economics and is based on four major assumptions, and it is essential that you understand these assumptions clearly. The external environment imposes and constraints that determine strategic choices of the firm. Basically, what this assumption is stating is the macroeconomic and the microeconomic environment in which the firm operates creates a context and constrains the firm in what they can and cannot do. Second assumption, similarity in strategically relevant resources causes competitors to pursue similar strategies. What this means to say is that when firms operate in one context, the imposed pressures are similar, and the resources that the firms can actually possess, or the resources that the firms can actually seek from the marketplace or the environment, is similar. Therefore, since all firms have access to similar kind of resources, all the firms will pursue similar behaviors or similar kind of strategies. Resources differences among competitors are short-lived due to resource mobility across firms. This is the third assumption. What this is trying to say is that generally firms should have similar kind of resources because they are operating in the same economic environment and the same industry. So therefore firms should have same kind of resources. If they do not, if they have different set of resources, eventually that difference disappears because firms' resources are mobile across organizational boundaries. That means over a long period of time, all firms will have similar kind of resources. The final assumption is about the managerial behavior. Strategic decision makers are rational and engage in profit maximization behaviors. So what they're trying to say is that all actions initiated by the managers are basically deliberate and rational, and they always try to increase the shareholder wealth by profit maximization behaviors. So these are the four underlying assumptions of IO model, which is an external perspective. We will talk about this IO model or the external perspective in greater detail in chapter 2, which is external analysis. So now let's look at the model of above average returns. How can one produce above average returns using or keeping in mind or looking through the IO model? The very first thing a manager or an individual is supposed to do is scan their external environment or study the external environment, which is composed of three environments or three sub-dimensions. The very first one is the macroeconomic environment or the general environment. That is about the entire economy that in which they are actually operating. The industry environment usually determined using Porter's 5 forces. We will talk about this in greater detail in chapter 2, and the competitor environment. At the second step, after external analysis, what you do is you identify an industry that has high potential for profits, which is considered to be an attractive industry. Then you invest into that particular industry or venture into that particular industry. And then once you venture into that particular industry, you are going to formulate a strategy that will allow you to operate in that particular industry and that will give you the ability to generate above average returns. Then, based on the industry that you've chosen and the strategy that you've formulated, you seek the assets and skills that are required to formulate this strategy and implement this particular strategy. Then you implement the strategy using the firm's skills and assets that you've developed, and this will result in superior returns or above average returns. So basically what you're trying to do is, first you look externally. You're not looking at the organization or what you actually have within the organization. Rather, what you're doing is looking at the macroeconomic and the microeconomic environment and the industry environment, and you look at all the industries operating within that particular economy, and then you choose one particular industry that you find attractive, not based on the skills and capabilities or the assets and resources that you actually have, but based on purely the macro and the microeconomic context or the constraints or the structures. Once you located an attractive industry, you're going to formulate your strategy, then you pool your resources and build the capabilities that are required to implement and be successful in this particular industry, and then finally implement your strategy, and that will result in superior returns. Next, let's look at the internal perspective or the RBV or the resource-based model. The resource-based model of above average returns assumes that organization is a collection of unique resources and capabilities. The uniqueness of its resources and capabilities is the basis of a firm's strategy and its ability to earn above average returns. Basically, this is an internal perspective. Rather than looking at the macroeconomic or microeconomic environment, you're purely attempting to just look within your organization and trying to see what resources you have and how you can actually be successful using those resources. So this RBV model is based on or founded on these 4 assumptions, and these 4 assumptions are very important, and I expect you to learn these. First one, firms acquire different resources. If you notice the distinction between IO model and the RBV model, the difference is that in IO model they state that all firms operating within that macroeconomic environment and the industry have similar resources. Here firms can have different resources. Firms deliberately acquire different set of resources. And firms, second assumption, firms develop unique capabilities based on how they combine and use resources. The combinations of resources, not the resources itself. Many organizations possess similar resources, but how you combine them result in unique capabilities. So two organizations might have exactly identical resources, but might have different capabilities because they combine them in different manner. And then the third assumption is resources and certain capabilities are not highly mobile across organizations or across firms. This is distinct from IO model, which states that any differences between the resources, organizational resources, is short-lived because resources are mobile across firms. Here, according to RBV, or the internal perspective, the resources and capabilities are not highly mobile across firms. That means any actions that result or any strategies that are devised based on these will be specific to the particular organization. And finally, differences in resources and capabilities are basis of competitive advantage and firm's performance rather than industry structural characteristics. So the final assumption states that whatever the firm performance is because of the competitive advantages that they have, because of the resources and capabilities that they possess, and it is the resulting performance is not because of some industry structure, rather it is because of your own capabilities and resources which result in competitive advantages. So now I hope you're able to distinguish between how you approach the markets or above average returns through an external perspective such as industrial organizational model or an internal perspective such as RBV model. Let's look at this resource-based model of above average returns. As a first step, what you tend to do is you will audit or perform an audit of the resources that you actually have within your organization. Then you determine the firm's capabilities, okay, capacity to integrate set of resources to integratively perform a task or activity. So once you have these capabilities, what capabilities can you perform? And then so determine the potential of firm's resources and capabilities in terms of competitive advantage. What you try to do is see, okay, what kind of competitive advantages can I generate using the resources that I have and the capabilities that I actually have. Then you will look at an attractive industry that will actually allow you to use these competitive advantages in that particular industry. Okay, an industry with opportunity that can be exploited by firms' resources and capabilities. Okay. Finally, strategy formulation and implementation. You select a strategy that best allows the firm to utilize its resources and capabilities relative to the opportunity that is available in the external market or the external environment. And finally, this will result in superior returns or above average returns. So what you're trying to do here is as a first step that you're looking inside your organization, auditing and identifying the resources that you actually have. And then you determine the firm's capabilities. What capabilities can result with the resources that you actually have? And then determine the potential for developing competitive advantages. And then you look at an attractive industry and then formulate a strategy that allows you to best utilize your capabilities in this particular industry, and this will result in superior returns. So these are two distinct models or approaches to above average returns. So neither of these two models are unique or say perfect in the sense. In a day-to-day world, you have to take or examine both external perspective as well as from within the organization. What opportunities are available in the marketplace and what is the most suitable industry. And at the same time, you have to look at what kind of capabilities and resources that I actually have. Okay, so only then will a manager be able to make a decision that will give competitiveness and ability to achieve superior returns. So as a manager, you have to look the external environment of the organization in which you're operating, as well as internally, you have to look at the resources, capabilities, and what core competencies and competitive advantages that you can actually generate. So that is how you end up with a superior returns. So let's look at this strategic management process is what we call. What is strategic management process? It is nothing but full set of commitments, decisions, and actions to achieve strategic competitiveness and above average returns. This definition is very similar to the definition of strategy that we've looked at. There are 3 steps here. The first one involves analysis, that is internal analysis as well as external analysis. External analysis based on IO model and internal analysis based on resource-based model. Based on these, what you do is formulate a strategy, okay, whether it is business level strategy or a corporate level strategy. We'll talk about it in much more detail. And then strategy implementation. You need to not only formulate a strategy, implement it. When you formulate an appropriate strategy and implement it in the right manner, it will result in superior firm performance. So this is an overview of the strategic management process. Okay, and we will follow this particular process throughout the chapter or throughout the course to end up with the completion of the entire process. So we will look into the analysis part, which is chapter 2 and chapter 3. We will go through the strategy formulation, both business level and corporate level strategy formulations, and then finally we will look at corporate governance and organizational structures and controls as strategy implementation aspects. Thank you. That concludes part 2 of strategic management and competitiveness.